Another Prevention is Cure podcast with me, Prof Grant Schofield, and we've got a really excellent guest today. He's been on here before. In fact, he was the second ever guest on the original series of the Prevention is Cure podcast. It's Dr Glen Davies, general practitioner extraordinaire. G'day, Glenn.
Hey, thank you, Grant. And as I reflect on this, it's basically all your fault. You know, my journey, I think, began with listening to you lecture at a general practice conference in Rotorua, and I don't remember the exact year, but it may have been 2017. And it all really went from there. I heard you say type 2 diabetes can be reversed, and I went, that is the most bizarre and unusual statement I've ever heard. Is that true? So, yeah, that was a profound moment for me. I think I might have been the only person that came up after the lecture and spoke to you, so I think it was quite a novel idea back then in 2017.
Yeah, I think most people were actually in the wrong room. I think they thought they'd come to how to manage urinary tract infections in postmenopausal women, and it turned out to be the one on insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So I think they were a little bit confused by the whole thing. But you're right, yeah, you were the only person who came up, and I gave several talks in that whole conference, and you were actually the only person that came up. But then you went on to actually change your practice. I think I actually may have cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in normal doctors' revenue because of the way you changed your practice. I'm sorry for that. But you also went on to pretty much reverse the most cases of type 2 diabetes of anyone ever in the history of New Zealand medicine. So do you want to talk about that journey?
Yeah, well, sort of following on from that lecture. In fact, the lecture that I went to after that was from a bariatric surgeon who said type 2 diabetes can be reversed with bariatric surgery. So it was two in a row. So that's, I think, why it was so profound. And then the third experience on my journey was a patient of mine called Wayne, who happens to have an IQ of 160, so he's quite hard to disregard. He came in and told me I was bloody useless. It was about time I read something, and he put 6 books on my desk, and one of them was What the Fat, coincidentally. So it kind of came round in a full circle. Plus Jason Fung's book, The Diabetes Code, and some others, and that really, there was no holding me back from there.
How is that confronting, or is that just normal in general practice? I haven't heard that much of that happening where the patient comes in, or the client, as you like to call them, and says, like, you've actually got no idea what you're doing, sort your shit out. How did you feel?
No, that's actually quite unusual. I think they do that, in the waiting room. They don't usually come in and do it. But Wayne's an upfront sort of a guy, and yeah, how does that feel? That's really confronting, particularly when it's true. You know, you're bringing up a family, life's really busy, and it was difficult to read clinical papers and books, and I suspect I hadn't done that for close to 20 years. So the truth is the most confronting, isn't it? And it was true.
And what happened from there? Did you read any of the books?
Oh, I did, and in fact, I think I've still got a copy of that original copy of What the Fat on my bookshelf, which is still probably one of the best textbooks on low-carb nutrition still around, in fairness. So well done to you and your co-authors.
Thanks. I think, it's the scientific side of things, and knowing what to do is one thing, but and I think we'll get onto this topic later in the podcast as well, but knowing how to do it. So how to do it is the practical stuff, as well as the stuff that seems to have completely flown under the radar with general practice, which is the behavior change aspects of things. Asking questions. The fact is, if you tell someone what to do, the idea of a prescription where you're prescribed an activity is virtually the worst way to deal with behavior change. So I think when we wrote that, we were thinking about that. side of things as well.
Yeah, and we'll go on to this paternalistic style of medicine, where you tell people what to do, or as you say, you prescribe, and how that is the exact opposite of the health coach approach. Yeah, but you asked me, where did it go from there? Well, Wayne and some others, we sort of formed a bit of a peer group, and then we invited patients along, and it sort of became the beginning of a group that's now been running for 6 years called Reverse T2 Diabetes Taupō, and we ran weekly meetings, and really just sort of spoke about how to do low carb nutrition. Looked at the topics of insulin resistance and a whole lot of other topics over the 6 years. And that, in combination with what we were doing in the practices, has resulted in Taupō with over 200 people reversing their type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes in Taupō and the larger community. Yeah.
How many cases of diabetes had you reversed before you started this program?
0. Absolutely none, and I didn't actually think it was possible, and I think that most general practitioners still view type 2 diabetes as a chronic, progressive condition that eventually leads to insulin, blindness, dialysis, and death, and that it's irreversible, and what we're trying to do is to slow that progression down, which is a pretty sad way of viewing it. You and I, and I'm sure the majority of the people listening to this podcast, know that the opposite is true. It's a relatively easy condition to reverse with the right approach.
So what do you make of when you reflect on your practice before you switch to this way of thinking?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Grant, because I grew up in the medical model. I knew nothing different, and in fairness, um, illness has changed profoundly through our careers. If when you and I began our careers, I think we were just at the tail end of the infectious disease era,
Mm.
meaning the majority of conditions were caused by bacteria and viruses, and they could be cured with a pretty simple approach that fitted nicely into a 10 or 15-minute consultation. And, that's the germ theory, the idea that you can use a simple intervention to deal with the problem, and that's it. And that was really the majority of medicine until, and I would say we could probably pinpoint the date. I would say around 1980 was that inflection point where we saw a transition, or a dramatic transition, from the infectious disease era now into this new era of disease, the non-communicatable disease era. And it's been profound. But my observation is that because it's happened through our careers, I graduated in 1989, so I've sort of grown up with this. It's a bit like that analogy of boiling the frog. I
Yeah.
think you and I have grown up with it, and so I don't think we've noticed. If you asked, if you could conjure up a physician from, say, 100 years ago and ask them to consult now, I would suggest that they would have no skills whatsoever to deal with these modern conditions, which are all the manifestation of insulin resistance. But it's type 2 diabetes, it's overweight and obesity, it's hypertension, it's ischemic heart disease, it's Alzheimer's disease, it's neurological conditions, and it's autoimmune conditions. And that physician would really have no capacity to deal with it, because they'd all be new conditions to him or her.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it wasn't, when you think about the metabolic syndrome as it's been come to be known, I mean, that wasn't even no one even had thought that there's these sort of metabolic markers, 5 of them, we'll talk about those 5 in a sec, until the mid to late 90s, that wasn't even a thing. No one
Yes.
even knew those were markers, common markers across all of modern chronic disease. And so that's the late 90s. And so that means it didn't even make its way to New Zealand until the early 2000s. And so the idea, so we'll just go through the 5 things. So we've got, and I'll get on each one of them to you just to make what comes to mind about lifestyle behaviors and things. So hypertension.
Yeah, I I refer to hypertension as the gateway to polypharmacy and ill health, because most medical professionals view hypertension as idiopathic, meaning we don't know the cause. You and I and most of the people listening to this do know that hypertension is not idiopathic. Hypertension, we do know the cause, and it's caused by insulin resistance. So if we deal with the insulin resistance, you can reverse the hypertension, and it's not necessary to treat that with medicines. In fairness, I don't even really know the names of the medicines you use to treat hypertension, because I generally don't need to use them, because I know the cause of hypertension. It's insulin resistance, and you deal with that with lifestyle change. If it's not that, then there's some other cause of hypertension which needs to be investigated and found. And there's, a list of quite complex conditions like pheochromocytoma and stuff. But there is a cause. It's not idiopathic the majority of the time. So starting that first medicine for hypertension, candistatin or whatever you're starting, begins this process of not dealing with the cause of the problem, but just starting one medicine after another, and not preventing the heart attack, not preventing the Alzheimer's, not preventing the diabetes. So I call it the gateway drug because, or the gateway condition. I'm using that analogy of, we talk about marijuana being the gateway drug to using harder drugs like P, for example. Starting that first antihypertensive and not dealing with the cause of the problem is the gateway to polypharmacy. And you actually taught me this, Grant, but medications are the third commonest cause of death, behind heart disease and cancer. So to begin that process of polypharmacy is a big step, especially if you haven't looked for the cause. And the analogy I use is, you're driving along in your car and that warning light comes on, that yellow engine symbol, and it's like, okay, I've got 2 choices here. I've got to make that yellow symbol go away. I can call in at a mechanic and ask them to tell me what's wrong with the car. But the other solution is, I can get a little bit of black insulation tape and I can stick it over the symbol. Both times we've made the warning light go away. Option 1 is a better option than option 2, but we're using option 2 in medicine. We're lowering the blood pressure without finding out what the cause is. We've tap ourselves on the shoulder, don't we? And we go, what a fine doctor am I? The blood pressure is now 130/70, but we didn't deal with the cause of the problem, and we didn't prevent all the consequences of hyperinsulinemia. We ignored the warning light. And that's one of my biggest beefs in medicine currently. Don't ignore the warning light. Deal with the cause of the problem.
Yeah, I really love that warning light thing. I was hoping you were going to say that, so that's cool that you did. One interesting thing with high blood pressure and its rapid reduction or resolution with improved whole food eating, especially if you restrict the carbohydrates and sort out your insulin resistance, is a rapid return to normal. And people who are on blood pressure meds often get episodes of really low blood pressure. And in fact, bizarrely, we've been criticised about, both you and I, for causing harm because of that, which is a really weird thing to be accused of, right?
Yeah,
But to be fair, people do need to manage, to keep an eye on that if they're changing their diet. Yeah.
yeah. Just to follow on, one more thing, I've been told, and I think this is true, that if you have malignant hypertension, so extremely high blood pressure in Germany, you're admitted to hospital and you're fasted until the blood pressure normalizes. That to me is a stunning example that you've got to deal with the hyperinsulinemia and the insulin resistance.
Yeah, so there's definitely references to that from the 60s and 70s. I'm not sure if they're still doing that in Germany, if that's still a thing, but yeah, they've still got a long history of fasting to normalize, severe hypertension. So that's interesting. Okay, so that's the first feature is hypertension. Let's tick off some other ones. So the second one is high density lipoproteins. If those are low, that's a problem. What gets those up?
Yeah, so exercise, movement. That's one of the profound ways of influencing your HDL, high density lipoprotein. So that'd be where I would go on that question.
Yeah, and I suppose these are the buses bringing back stuff from cells. So you've just got cells burning more fat and acting more metabolically like they're supposed to. I guess that's number two. Number three is central adiposity. So a lot of weight around your tummy, but encasing the organs. What's the story with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so that term visceral fat, and we actually have some quite nice tools for measuring visceral fat. You might be able to comment a little bit more on the accuracy of the impedance scales, but for sort of $89, for example, you can buy a set of scales that tells you where you are storing your fat. Are you storing it around your organs and in your liver, or are you storing it under the skin? Because storing it under the skin is actually quite healthy. Storing it around your liver is absolutely not. Do you have any comments on the accuracy of those scales?
Yeah, we did quite a bit of work on this about a decade ago. I think the technology hasn't changed too much since then, but it's been packaged better. So I don't mind them. So there is a thing called sensitivity and specificity, like two different ways of measuring. So if you get a whole group of people and measure everyone, it gives you pretty much the right answer across that group. And if you measure yourself multiple times, you'll get the right answer. On one specific measurement versus the next, it's quite influenced by hydration status because it's measuring electrical current through the body. And yeah, and there you go with your water there, Glenn. The electrical current travels faster through the water components than the muscle and bone components. So it's a little bit inaccurate with that. But if people have got them and are using them regularly, you're getting almost exactly the right answer on the average. So yeah, I don't mind them. I've used it myself and got pretty accurate answers, to be honest. I just did it at the same time every day.
Mm. Yeah, I just bought a set for $89 from Chemist Warehouse, and yeah, I'm thinking my visceral fat was fine, which I was pleased to see, but my subcutaneous fat had increased from the last time I did it, which was a little bit disappointing.
What percentage are you? Did it give you a percentage?
Um, yeah, I think it said subcutaneous fat 19%. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, that's I vary between about 19 and 13, depending on how fit and lean I am. Um,
Yeah.
I sort of generally have a rule of thumb in my life. Once it gets above 19, I need to. Well, actually, as it starts to approach 19, I realise that I'm going to have to act or react and actually do something more about that. I mean, I'm a pretty good eater, and I think you're more disciplined than I am. But I do find the food environment relatively pathological, and I do quite well on periods of quite severe strictness, and then my foot comes off the pedal. Where I think you're more evenly temperamented than I am. Would that be fair?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think that's fair. But we're probably going off topic, but
Oh yeah.
you
Okay. So
bring
hang on, Miss
no.
Mary.
Could I just comment on what you said? That on and off the wagon.
Yeah.
That's the reality of what happens, isn't it? And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, as long as we know how to climb back on again.
Yeah. I had this period for a month when my diet was absolutely perfect. There was nothing but whole food. It was harvested naturally, and I was in great shape. The thing is, I was doing some work for the World Health Organization in the remote Pacific, and that's all that was available. Uh, no, but it speaks to the idea of the pathological food environment, right? I was quite happy. I was healthy. I wasn't craving anything. Um, yeah, but I literally just walked upstairs before, and my mum had dropped off these things called peppermint crunch. They're like a sort of cross between a fudge and a biscuit, and they were my favourite thing in my childhood. And it's um, Father's Day, and I don't know why you should celebrate being a father on that day with confectionery, but of course, I started eating one, and then one led to three, and here I am. So yeah, I think I definitely struggle with that. Yeah.
Yeah, we should come back to what you've just said, because it's a key kind of principle, isn't it? We in times gone by, eating a whole food diet was the only option. Now eating a whole food diet is a challenge, and that's what you're meaning by the pathological food environment, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so we've done blood pressure, we've done HDL. We did visceral adiposity. Any other things I want to add about visceral adiposity? Of course, a great way to get that down is to get your insulin down. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, insulin resistance, I think, is the key understanding in non-communicatable disease and in modern medicine. And I was actually thinking about it. I actually wrote the stats down. 70% of general practice consultations are for a chronic health condition. So if we didn't have these chronic health conditions, we would have 70% less consultations than we currently do. And then 70% of chronic health conditions are due to insulin resistance. So doing the maths on that, 49% of consultations, or half of the consultations, are due to insulin resistance. If we could treat insulin resistance effectively, we would have halved the number of people coming to the doctor. We have an overburdened health system that is not coping, and it's only going to get worse. Yet we're not dealing with the cause of 50% of those consultations. So to me, knowing how to manage hyperinsulinemia is the single key thing that we need to do in medicine. Knowing how to deal with insulin resistance is the single key thing we need to do. So, if someone presented me with an Aladdin's lamp, and you rubbed it and the genie came out, and the genie went, oh, so you're not Aladdin. I went, no, I'm Glenn. And he went, well, Aladdin gets 3 wishes, you only get one, and it has to be related to your work. I'd go, easy, cure insulin resistance. That would be my wish, and we would no longer have an overburdened health system. We would have dealt with heart attacks, Alzheimer's, diabetes, weight problems, hypertension, and we would have a system that coped and thrived. So hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance is the key understanding, but we weren't taught it in medical school because, like you've referred to earlier, Grant, it basically wasn't a thing. And they say that medicine changes with the death of one professor at a time. It takes sort of 50 years for the syllabus to change significantly. And I didn't get taught insulin resistance. It's starting to be discussed or a topic in medicine, but I don't think the people who are teaching it necessarily understand insulin resistance. It is the key understanding, and the majority of doctors don't fully get it, and they don't explain it well to their patients.
Oh, hey, so that's something I've been meaning to ask you about on that topic, because your son Jack, who is now Dr. Jack Davies, and he's got involved in some general practice as well. I think is he going down the general practice pathway?
He hasn't decided, but he did do a month working with me, which was the coolest thing. Really
Yeah,
was the coolest thing. We were working side by side.
that's cool. What would he? I mean, I know he already knows about insulin resistance and that sort of thing because he's been around you. But what would he say about the curriculum?
Yeah, it's it's interesting because the medical students are entirely embedded in the medical model. Um, they don't know anything other than what they're being taught, and the medical syllabus is so full and so demanding. There isn't actually a lot of opportunity for thinking outside of it. So they just cope with what they're taught, and he's not really taught that topic in any real detail. It gets mentioned, but it's not taught. This is the key understanding. Basically, Jack, this is the only thing you need to understand for your 6 years in medicine. If you get this, you're going to be a fantastic doctor. It's not presented in that way. It might be a lecture.
Right, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Mm.
Okay, and so of course, yeah, one of the we don't need a genie to grant us a magic wish necessarily, unless that wish was having everyone understand that the easiest way to reduce your insulin is to not eat sugar and starch in the first place. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
What would it be okay if I used an analogy that's a little bit sexist, Grant? And why I say this is I've been trying to find the perfect analogy for insulin resistance, and the only one that I've come up with, despite trying many times, is one that's a little bit sexist. But I think it's okay because it's equally sexist against men and women. So it's kind of I'm either going to get in trouble from men and from women, or because it's sort of neutral, it might be okay.
Okay, let's run with it. I don't know what we're up for, but let's run with
But
it.
apologies, and please don't, anyone that's listening, don't be offended. It's not designed to offend. It's because it's really important that we learn how to explain insulin resistance in a way that people understand. So here we go, and please forgive me. So you've just got married and you've just returned from your honeymoon, and the wife says to the new husband, "Honey, can you bring in the firewood?" And what happens? He instantly jumps up, he runs outside, he brings in armloads of firewood, he cuts kindling, he lights the fire, and the firewood box is full, and all it took was a quiet suggestion. So
So
that's
he's
one
wife,
big.
he's wife sensitive.
He's highly wife sensitive. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go forward to so you can see how it's equally offensive to men and women. So I think that's why it's okay. Now go ahead to 1 year, and the wife says to the husband, "Honey, will you bring in the firewood?" And he goes, "Yep, yeah, I will. I'm just watching something on TV. I'll do it during the ads." And during the ads, he does go down, bring up the firewood. There's no kindling. He doesn't stoke the fire, but he does what was requested, brings up the firewood. So that's at 1 year. So he's developing a little bit of less wife sensitivity, a little bit of wife resistance. Okay, now we're going forward 10 years, and some of the people listening might actually predict where we're going here. So we're now gone through 10 years of marriage, and the wife comes in and says, "Honey, will you bring in the firewood?" And it's as if he didn't even hear. He's lying on the couch watching TV, and it was as if he didn't even hear. So she has to sort of stand in front of the television, and she has to jump up and down and wave her arms and yell and shout a little bit. And he kind of, all he does is just sort of look around her like that so he can still see the television, and the firewood doesn't get brought in, despite a lot of gesticulating, possibly a little bit of swearing, maybe going and turning the television off, but the firewood doesn't get brought up. So he has developed quite profound wife resistance, and it's taken about 10 years to occur. So the analogy there is that's what's happening with insulin. initially, when you're young, you're maybe a 15-year-old sports playing young man. You're highly sensitive to insulin, and you can eat a whole lot of crap food, and it gets dealt with. Try that 10 years later, and that same diet will result in diabetes because of the development of insulin resistance.
I suppose just just riffing with the story there, I suppose in the end, she's jumping up and down, turning the lights off, nothing happens. And of course, the consequence of type 2 diabetes in the end is that the insulin doesn't work at all. It actually goes away, it stops functioning. Um, so the ultimate end game for this fellow is that his wife just leaves.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
I've thank you for expanding the analogy. I thought there must be an end to the story.
And of course, if you can get insulin down, and then all of the normal hormonal signals around leptin and insulin start operating as normal again, you become more sensitive to insulin. Then the reason we're on this topic in the first place is that then you unlock your body's ability to burn fat, including visceral fat, including fat around the liver, and like you're not moving. Even if very low calorie diets are effective, the reason they're effective is because they get insulin down to the
Mhm.
level that allows fat to being burned. So all of these diets essentially are, in the end, low carbohydrate diets. You either do it by just eating very little of everything, or you concentrate on the carbohydrates. There's no other way to burn fat other than getting insulin down, because if it's high, you simply can't burn fat, right?
Yeah. Actually, it's such a key point, Grant. I'd love to emphasize it, is that insulin is the fat storage hormone.
Yeah.
Um, if insulin is high, it tells the body to store fat, and if insulin is low, it tells the body to store fat. And when you think back into evolutionary biology, that ability to store fat in times of plenty and use it later in times of scarcity, I would suggest is perhaps the reason that Homo sapiens have become the dominant species on Earth. They developed the ability to store fat in times of plenty, perhaps when there were apples on the tree at the end of summer, and they were able to get through the harsh winter, the period of food scarcity, because they had that ability to store fat, and bears have the same capacity. Um, so apparently cavemen didn't have refrigerators. This ability to store fat, excess carbohydrate, and turn it into fat through the process of de novo lipogenesis, the storage of or returning carbohydrate into fat, was the caveman's refrigerator, and it was a key ability to surviving times of food scarcity. But unfortunately, we no longer have those times of food scarcity. Pack and Save is open 7 days a week, every month of the year. If we closed Pack and Save down for 3 months a year, again, we would be returning much more to a natural sort of process, and we wouldn't have these modern diseases.
That just reminds me, and I always forget the exact mechanism. I think it's hormone sensitive lipase. If you've been to one of Glen's talks, they're fantastic. Although I just warn you, he does some really good PowerPoint slides, and he does some other PowerPoint slides that are just photos that he's taken on his iPhone of some piece of paper that he's scribbled up of some complex diagram. But tell me about the hormone sensitive lipase part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. So, triglyceride, which is fat,
Oh, hang on,
what you
hang on, hang on.
yeah,
Stop right
what
there. Stop right there. Hang on. So, hang on. We've done blood pressure. We've
yeah,
done HDL. We've done visceral adiposity. Actually, now we're getting on to triglycerides. So it's the fourth feature of the metabolic syndrome, and we're going to do all
yeah,
five features. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Um, Triglyceride biochemically is a large molecule. Its structure is it has a glycerol backbone and then it has these 3 fatty acid tails hanging off it. It's too big a molecule to move from the outside of the cell into the cell. It has to be broken down into its 4 components to get it inside the cell. And the enzyme that does that is called lipase. So lipase cuts it up into 4 parts. It goes into the cell and it's reassembled inside these amazing containers. Why is the fat cell so amazing? It can actually increase in volume 1,000 times. That's a pretty special
Wow.
container. Great if you're trying to store fat to get through the harsh winter. Not so good if you're living in our modern food environment. And then to your point, hormone-sensitive lipase, within the cell, you need hormone-sensitive lipase to break the triglyceride into its 4 components to let it get out. Now, this is the big point here. Insulin disables hormone-sensitive lipase. Say it again, insulin kills hormone-sensitive lipase. So you can do a whole lot of stuff. You can exercise, you can calorie restrict. If you don't lower insulin and allow hormone-sensitive lipase to come back to life, then that triglyceride ain't getting out of the fat cell, it's trapped in there. So again, that's why insulin is the fat storage hormone. That's why if insulin is high, you store fat, and if insulin has to be low to allow hormone-sensitive lipase to come back to life and burn it. So the key understanding with triglyceride is insulin needs to be low. And this idea that you can turn carbohydrate into fat. So all that a carbohydrate is glucose molecules that are joined together with chemical bonds. The process of digestion is turning those strings of carbohydrates into individual glucose molecules, and that becomes blood glucose. Now, I think there's a lot of people that don't actually understand that. They get mixed up in this high glycemic index, low glycemic index stuff, but the truth is all carbohydrates become blood glucose. I'm going to say that again. All carbohydrates, even low glycemic index carbohydrates, even your healthy brown rice, it all becomes blood glucose, because what else could possibly happen to it? You know, and I think that's the part that we understand and we emphasize that gets lost by other people teaching in this topic. All carbohydrates, even the healthy carbs, even your Vogel's bread, your brown rice and your kumara, it all becomes blood glucose, and it all has to be dealt with by the body. It all goes through the same process. So 3 things that can happen. You can store it as glycogen, and you can store quite a lot of glucose as glycogen, about a day's worth of food. And fantastic if you do an Ironman every day, you'll empty your glycogen stores. Not so good if you just go for a brief walk. Now, I know at the moment, Grant, you're doing a lot of training, so you're probably emptying your glycogen stores quite effectively most days. And so therefore, there's a lot of capacity within your muscle and liver to store that food, that carbohydrate, as glycogen. For me, who just went for a half an hour walk today, less capacity. Okay, so you can store it as
Yeah.
glycogen. You can use it for energy, turn it into ATP. But the key understanding here, any excess blood glucose that is not stored as glycogen or burnt for energy goes to the liver, and it gets turned into triglyceride or fat. So any excess blood glucose gets turned into triglyceride through a process called de novo lipogenesis. So let's just break that down. Novo means new, genesis to make, lipid means fat, the making of new fat. Through this biochemical process, de novo lipogenesis, it becomes fat. And what happens to fat? We store it for later, or we use it for energy, but in most cases, we're storing it for later. So I think that's the key biochemistry to understand in this topic.
Yeah, and so of course the thing is, if you go and get your fasting triglycerides measured at your doctor and they're high, then that's a really strong indication that you're walking around with blood sugars that are in excess of your ability to use them in the muscle and liver, and now they're getting packaged up and pushed around the body. And I think it's such an interesting measure of metabolic function, and those numbers don't lie. You're not turning up with high fasting triglycerides if you're eating a whole food, low carbohydrate diet. It's not a thing, right? And so that's the fourth feature of
Absolutely.
the metabolic syndrome is high triglyceride. I really liked two things that you did there, Glenn. I really liked the whole explanation of hormone sensitive lipase, the disassembly and reassembly, and then disassembly again to be redeployed outside the cell. And I kept forgetting to even talk about that, and it's not common for anyone to talk about that. So people should use that one more. I think that's really an important thing. And then, of course, the idea of de novo lipogenesis. That's where it's an interesting thing for doctors actually to get their head around, but all public as well. That fat in your blood, as measured by triglycerides, is actually most likely a function of not fat that you've eaten, which seems counterintuitive, but it's actually of the carbohydrate that's been pushed into fat because it has to go to that. There's no other destination, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and a really interesting trial, the EPIC trial, looked at the structure of the LDL, the low density lipoprotein, and it estimated that only 0.05% of the triglyceride within that phospholipid had come from the diet. 99.5% of it had come from de novo lipogenesis. So when you see a high triglyceride, it's not the fat that you've been eating, because that basically gets burnt for fuel. It's the fat that you are making through de novo lipogenesis. So a high triglyceride equals eating too many Tim Tams and too many potatoes. It does not equal eating too much avocado and olive oil. So that's the key understanding. And in fairness, before I listened to your first lecture back in around 2017, when I saw a high triglyceride, I really didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what to do with it, and I assumed that it came from eating too much fat. Now I know that that's not the case, and it's eating too much carbohydrate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty key concept, isn't it? Like, once you know that, like, it changes everything. Yeah. Okay, so the
Yeah,
last feature
it
of the
changes the
metabolic
advice.
syndrome is yeah. The last feature of the metabolic syndrome is just high blood sugar. It's also known as insulin resistance, but for this point, we'll call it's identified by high blood sugar, which I guess was related to everything we've talked about. But how do you measure blood sugar? Why are you interested in it? What are the consequences?
Yeah, when I think of the answer to your question, I come back to one of your quotes, Grant, that I love. It's your quote is pre-diabetes is pre-nothing. Um, and what you're referring to there is the fact that when the blood glucose goes up, even if the HbA1c is only gone to 41, that is profound metabolic failure. That is a very, very significant thing to happen for your blood glucose to go up to create an HbA1c of 41. And this term pre-diabetes needs to disappear from the dictionary, from our language, because it implies that it's pre-something and it's okay. It's okay until you get to diabetes, and then we have to do something about it. But I know that you and I, Grant, when we see that rise in blood glucose, that's when we jump up and down, start, sort of gesticulating and making a big fuss, because it represents the end of 10 years of this metabolic derangement, and we really have to react dramatically to that pre-diabetes, that HbA1c of 41. In fact, we need to react before that. We need ways of measuring hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, so we can deal with it before you lose control of your blood glucose. You're pretty metabolically unwell by the time you can no longer control your blood glucose.
Okay, so if I can summarize that, I think that you did a great job there. The point that you actually start to lose control of your blood glucose is actually quite a significant indication of real problems. No matter how much insulin you have, you still can't get your glucose under control. Um, Perversely,
Yes.
one of the main solutions in modern medicine to that problem is to add extra insulin by injection. What do you make of that?
Um, I would say that that is malpractice. Um, it's a brain fart. It shows a complete lack of understanding of this entire topic. And I would suggest that is malpractice to, when the problem is hyperinsulinemia, high insulin, to add more fuel to the fire is malpractice. And the analogy I use here is I'm supervising a registrar, and the registrar comes in and says, I've just diagnosed someone with hyperthyroidism and I've given them thyroxine. Okay, they've got a high thyroid hormone and I've given them more thyroid hormone. You would say to that registrar, well, I appreciate the fact that you've treated this person, but you really need to go and study your endocrinology because you've done it the wrong way around. It's exactly the same as someone with hyperinsulinemia and you give them more insulin. It is just as screwed up. There is no registrar that would give thyroxine to someone with hyperthyroidism. There are endocrinologists that will give insulin to someone with hyperinsulinemia. So it just shows a profound lack of understanding. And this is where I love Jason Fung's slide, and I'm sure many of the people listening can picture the slide of the Tokyo Underground, and you've got a whole lot of people standing on the platform. You've got a carriage with the door open, and it's full of people, and then you've got the underground pushers. They're men who are employed to push more people into the carriage so that the doors will close. A bizarre concept. It must be terribly uncomfortable inside those carriages. And the analogy of Jason Fung is that those people on the platform are glucose molecules. The people inside the carriage are glucose molecules, and you're needing more and more insulin to cram more and more glucose into that train. And the solution, obviously, is we need more of those men to push people into the train. And obviously, that's not the solution. The solution to this problem is some of those people need to work from home. You know, some of that glucose shouldn't be there in the first place. If we stopped eating as much carbohydrate, there would be less glucose, there'd be less need, there'd be less people in the train, and there'd be less need for those men. In fact, you wouldn't actually even need them. The doors would close on their own. So it's a fantastic analogy, and it summarizes both obesity and type 2 diabetes. There is just too much fuel everywhere. And the solution
Y-
is to put less in.
Yeah, I like that analogy, and of course, the problem in medicine is that a lot of endocrinologists think of insulin resistance as simply a dysfunction of the glucose receptor, the insulin receptor, and glucose transport things like they're gummed up and they just need a bit more signaling so they work better. But that's actually fundamentally not true. The doors work just fine, but there's already too many glucose in there. I've heard him talk about it another way. You should imagine you go on holiday, um, and you've got suitcases, mostly sort of 80% full. But while you're there, you end up going to the outlet mall, and you get a bit carried away, and you buy a lot of t-shirts and a few new pairs of shoes, and then you go home, and you can't fit any more in your suitcase, so you start to get you open up hotel door and you look around and there's the bellboys walking past and the cleaning ladies walking past, and you get them in and you're just like, hey, can you just sit on my suitcase while I try and zip it up? And sort of getting more insulin resistant at the same time. But of course, it's a exercise in futility. You just needed to either get rid of some t-shirts or buy fewer t-shirts in the first place. So it's another similar way of looking at it, I suppose. Hey, so if we
It's
summarize those 5 things, sorry, Karen.
I was just going to say these analogies are profoundly important because it's the distinct difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And I would even say we should drop the term diabetes because everyone thinks about type 1 diabetes and they confuse it with type 2 diabetes. I would love to get rid of the term pre-diabetes, and I think we should even start calling type 2 diabetes something different because it gets confused with type 1 diabetes where there's not enough insulin and the cell is empty of fuel. Type 2 diabetes needs a new name. I don't know what the best name is. I've been playing with that. I thought of calling it bad food disease, but the bad implies blame, so that's not perfect. But ultra processed food disease might be the best term, and then you start identifying the cause and identifying the solution. So drop the name type 2 diabetes, drop the pre-diabetes, and call it ultra processed food disease.
I love it. So if we take those 5 features together, hypertension, low HDL, uh, high triglycerides, central adiposity, and high glucose, then it's hard to know what the numbers are in Australia and New Zealand, but in the United States, this is now the new normal. So I think the NHANES data set, which is the best population data set in the world, really, 88% of Americans have one or more features of the metabolic syndrome. What do you make of that?
That's a profound statistic to suggest that only 12% of the adult population of the United States is well. Is so concerning. I don't think I can think of another situation in the history of humanity where 88% of the population is unwell. Perhaps, I don't know, would an analogy be famine? Possibly, but almost unheard of. And the fact that we are ignoring it, normalizing it, don't know how to treat it, calling it idiopathic, not identifying the cause, not putting pressure on the people that can make a difference. I'm flabbergasted, concerned, disturbed. Looking at probably New Zealand statistics, we're way behind that, but probably insulin resistance is over half of the adult population in New Zealand, I would suggest.
Mm. So I've heard you be quite critical in recent times of your disillusionment with the New Zealand medical system, and you have actually done something about that, to be fair. So we'll get to reversal NZ and your practice of mangakino, blue mango ideas as well in a sec. But can we just riff on that a little bit about where you're feeling your dissatisfaction with the system at the moment, and what you think should be done about it?
Yeah, it probably falls more into your area of public health, Grant, but we as individuals, we as clinicians can make an influence in the populations that we can influence, but the problem is the food environment has become toxic, and it really requires government level intervention to change the food environment, yet there's no indication that that's about to happen. Yet this is a crisis, this is an epidemic, this is a tsunami. This is costing and will continue to cost Vote Health more money than we can imagine. Why is the government remaining disinterested? Why is it not doing something about the food environment? Why is it not banning the easy access to ultra-processed food? Why are children still allowed to walk in and buy a packet of Tim Tams You know, all of these things. Why are soft drinks not locked behind like a locked cabinet like cigarettes are? Why can you walk in and buy a 2 litre bottle of Coke, when you're in a school uniform? All of this stuff has to change. And I guess my frustration is doctors who should know this stuff, and many do, are not putting enough pressure on the government to make these changes, because maybe not enough of us recognize just how significant, how big, how important. Maybe we're not articulating it or understanding it as clearly as you and I are discussing it now, Grant.
Yeah, I wouldn't be quite so generous to the medical profession, because what I often hear at the moment, especially from people advising about general practice and primary care in New Zealand, is that we will definitely find a solution to all our health problems. We just need to do more of what we're doing with more money, um, more of the same pharmacy first based medicine. I hear that so much. So, in fact, the predominant message, you can blame the government, and I'm all for blaming the government as well. But the predominant message that the government hears from their experts is that, in fact, we should do more of what we're doing. If we went harder with the same failing solution, and we're going to do this now, Glenn, in your mechanics analogy. So we'll just try and we'll expand
Yeah.
your mechanics thing. So tell us your mechanics analogy.
Yeah, so you're a mechanic and you run a workshop. If 8 cars come in the morning, then 8 cars need to leave in the evening. Um, okay, let's say 8 cars come in the morning and only 7 cars leave in the evening. What does your workshop look like after 1 year? You have 365 cars in your workshop. So to go and get the Toyota Hilux out of the middle of that becomes impossible. It just stops functioning. So we need to cure insulin resistance. We need to move people from our waiting rooms back into their homes. We need to actually cure people. And this word cure, I think, has become a dirty word in medicine. We use the term manage, but we can cure, or our clients can cure their insulin resistance. They no longer are sick people in our waiting rooms. They're free-ranging, normal citizens in the community. And this idea of curing and discharging from general practice is a concept that I would love to promote. You know, why hospitals function is that they discharge. Where do they discharge to? They discharge back to general practice, and everyone is considered to be unwell, or virtually everyone is unwell within that general practice, and general practice doesn't cope. The solution? General practice has to diagnose, recognize, and successfully treat insulin resistance and discharge those people back to the community. Um, so we then don't have as many sick people in our waiting rooms, and we start to cope again. We get our head above water. We can start to make a difference. And in preparing for this podcast, Grant, one of the realizations that I had is that you and Louise and Precure actually recognized this many, many years ago, is that we need a new breed of primary health practitioners that understand nutrition, understand insulin resistance, and understand behavioral change, because those are the three components that will allow people to be cured and actually return to functioning in the environment without the need to see their doctor every 3 months for a new prescription. So, congratulations. And I only really just realized, how profound what you recognized, 10 years or more ago is, because you recognized what the new breed of health practitioner needs to look like and the skills that they need to have.
I think you're a little bit kind in the sense that you've been and on the journey the whole way anyway. So you're automatically part of it. But yeah, I agree that unless you can change your behaviour, and let's face it, the holy grail of having a good life is knowing how to change yours and others' behaviour. If you can help do that, then you're going to be able to help people. And the sad thing about general practice and the medical system and all that we talk about it in is that it's full of awesome people. Like I don't know a single person who went into medicine with nefarious uh, reasons. Not only that, I was nowhere near
Hmm.
bright enough to get into medical school. And you were the 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 most intelligent people in society end up in medicine, and by the end they're burnt out, slightly cynical, and haven't made the difference that they wanted to make. And I think that's probably the most disappointing thing to me.
Yeah, I would even take that a step further. I think that the way that we teach medical students actually damages them intellectually. No, and there's a profound problem, or a fundamental problem. It's like, if you take a group of people and you tell them that they are the brightest cohort to leave school, and then you tell them that they are getting the best education possible, I believe you've created a lifelong non-learner. However, if you say to someone, you're not actually that bright, and we don't actually know if the stuff we're teaching you is true, you've created a lifelong learner. And I think that's one of the profound or fundamental problems with medicine is, I've watched our family members going through medicine, and that they're not taught how to think, they're not encouraged to think, they're just required to learn this enormous volume of information. And, this again comes to your area, Grant, but shouldn't we be encouraging them to think? One of our, children, who is a medical student just graduating this year, she said, don't tell me that low carb stuff. I'll fail my exams. I just got to learn what they're teaching me. To teach me the correct
Oh
stuff
my goodness.
later. Like, I'll fail my exam if you teach me all that low carb triglyceride stuff. And it's like, I don't know. There's something sad about that.
Yeah, I mean the center of medicine. I mean, I've heard Matthew Phillips talk about this. He said I'm a doctor of medicine. He said I would much prefer I was called a doctor of health.
Yes. Yeah. And this whole the whole medical uh environment, pharmaceutical industry sitting at the top, and very similar to what you said about doctors. I don't believe there's a whole lot of evil people in the pharmaceutical industry either. I think it's just capitalism, needing to return to your shareholders. There's an influence then on the medical school syllabus. This goes back to the Flixner report, 1910. So you have this medical model, and then we see that. So Grant, I've lost you. Um, I will carry on talking on the assumption that you're still there, but I've lost your video. Um, so if you've disappeared, Grant, could you give me a call on the phone? Yeah, so this medical model, we start with the pharmaceutical industry, comes down through universities, medical schools, and it comes down into the way that we practice, and we are taught a pill for every ill. One of the challenges I made to myself was to manifest, create, and demonstrate a better version of the healthcare system, because, as you say, I have been quite critical, and it's really not that cool to criticize without suggesting something better. So I wondered if I could do it better. And we basically set up a clinic, a metabolic health clinic focused on insulin resistance, using health coaches and that combination of low carbohydrate, whole food nutrition, um, recognizing and diagnosing insulin resistance, and then helping people to change their behavior. Could we do something better? And I believe we have. We've demonstrated many cases of diabetes reversal and people becoming healthier. And one of the key differences is people empowered to take control of their own health, walking beside people on their journey, and an empowerment model, not a paternalistic model where we tell people what to do and expect them to do it. And if they don't, we call them non-responders or non-compliant. This non-compliance because they didn't do what you told them to do is again a brain fart. No one in the pre-cure world would think you could tell someone what to do, and they would do it, and then if they didn't, we'd criticize them because they didn't do it. That just shows a profound lack of understanding of behavioral change. So yeah, Reversal NZ was a private clinic to see if we could do it better, and I believe we did. But I was giving a lecture at a general practice conference in Christchurch, and someone said to me, I'm not going to listen to a word you're saying because my patients are dramatically different to yours. Yours are wealthy, well-educated, and motivated. That's the exact opposite of my clients or my patients. And I went, that is absolutely fair criticism. So, yep, I'll accept that criticism. So, we've been lucky enough to become involved with a rural general practice in a small town in the South Waikato, and in there we're hoping in this community that we can set up a project where we can look at changing the health of an entire community, and demonstrating that journey and that process. So there's still quite a lot of work we need to do in terms of consultation, talking to the leaders in the community, and hopefully they're excited about this project as we are. And together as a community, we can make some change and hopefully increase both lifespan and health span. And you've been kind enough to offer to help with the design of that project and the statistical analysis afterwards. But I hope that we can do that. It's called Blue Zone Mango is the project, and hopefully we could turn this small rural community into the world's 6th blue zone.
Yeah, I guess that the beautiful thing is when you've just got one single general practice for the community, then you've actually got a little bit more chance of putting into place some of the other strands as well that you need to see success in that type of thing. So yeah, I really love your vision there. Interestingly, if people are watching the podcast, Glen's got a really nice sweatshirt on. But I feel quite bad about it. Last time I went to your place, I was really cold, and you said, "Oh, here, have this sweatshirt." And then you said, "Oh, it's too big for me. You might as well have it." So I went home with it, and now I look closely, and it's exactly the same sweatshirt as you gave me. Did you have to rush out and buy another one of the same one that you gave to me?
No, someone buys me the sweatshirt, so no, I don't buy any of my own clothes in fairness.
Oh, okay, that's what happens when you turn 60. Right, all right, I'm stopping. Hey, it's Grant here. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We don't advertise, we're never going to, but we have one request for you and one only. If you felt this show was worthwhile, can you please rate us, and please rate us 5 stars. That's it. Thanks very much.